Okay, I think I've got this recording now. So today for our webinar, we're going to discuss using SQL reports as InfoPath print views. In a webinar I did recently, we talked about some different manual changes you could make to a view. And in one of the manual changes I demonstrated, I passed in some form information as report parameters. And discussion ensued about possibly doing a webinar on this topic. So that's why we're talking about it today. Let's just go on to the next slide. This is just about the webinar audio. If you can't hear me, it's because you don't have the correct version of Link installed. Looks like Marcy is discussing the same thing with another attendee in chat right now. We are going to post this to YouTube when we are done, so you will have a chance to watch it later. We try to be relevant, timely, everything is live, so if I mess up, I mess up, and you just have to be patient with me, or if we have technical difficulties, that's just the way it goes some days. So, what is SSRS? Now, you know, hopefully everybody's a little familiar with it, but if you aren't, that's okay. If your enterprise has SQL Server, you most likely have the option of installing SQL Server reporting services. SSRS reports allow reporting on data in your SQL Server and other data sources. SQL Server reporting services, its own backend is SQL. Therefore, you do have to have SQL installed somewhere in order to use it. I've got the little MSDN blurb down here. Today, we're going to look at a report that's using SQL as a data source. That doesn't mean there aren't a lot of other options for data sources for your SQL reports. You can even use XML data connections, which would, at least in theory, imply that you would be able to report on your XML that's submitted directly to SharePoint. In practice, I have found the XML data connections to be a little challenging, but there's tutorials online, and I mean, especially when dealing with repeating data, but that's because I'm kind of a SQL head, so I'm more accustomed to working with table joins. But there's, you know, a lot of documentation online that you can find, and you can definitely walk through it and see what you can figure out. With a SQL report, you can pass in what are called URL parameters. So first off, there's a URL you can use to access the report server in order to generate the report you want with particular parameters. And that would mean, for example, that you could pass in a parameter to return data only for a specific item or set of items. Keeping that in mind, that's sort of what we're really looking at here today. If I fill out a form and I'm submitting it to SQL, or I'm reporting on the raw XML, I would want to be able to return data to my report for only this particular item, because in general, a report is often used to aggregate data for a multiplicity of items. But in this case, if we're trying to leverage this as a print view, we'd probably only want the data for this particular item, just for this thing. So one thing to keep in mind is you're going to have to, in your form, figure out whether or not your thing has been submitted. Right, so you're going to want to be tracking that. We're going to talk about all of this more in the demo. I just have some brief little slides for us to talk about first. You can specify the format that you want your report returned in. This is another kind of highlight about using this for your print view. You can, depending on the version of report server you have available to you, you can specify that you want to return as an image, for example, or a PDF, or a Word document, or an Excel file. So any of these options may be available to you. I've also included a link to the URL access parameter reference, and so there's a lot to be learned here. And of course, like most things that are URL available, you can practice in the browser, right? You don't have to open up your form and preview it and fill it out and try this and try that. That's, you know, just put it in the address bar of your browser and make sure your URL works. You can get your logic figured out before you put it in your form. So why would we want to do this? Well, InfoPath print views are, I don't know, maybe you've had better luck than I have. Maybe I've just been approaching them with too much hostility. But I have found InfoPath print views to be a little inflexible sometimes for my needs. I can't have data in my headers and footers, for example. Now, in some versions of SSRS, if you look back in 2005 or heaven forbid 2000, you're not going to find that capability. You would be able to pass in data as a parameter and leverage it that way. You can find a lot online. There's a lot of great tutorials on using SQL Server reporting services and building your reports. But you can also include things like charts. So, for example, if you needed to, from your form, be able to include a chart in the print view for whatever reason, you can do that in SSRS. It's got a lot of rich formatting features when you go and build a report. And you can render your report, as I mentioned, as a PDF, image, Excel, Word, etc. I consider them to have fewer headaches than InfoPath print views. A lot of that is probably because I have had some struggles with InfoPath print views based on the version of Internet Explorer installed and so forth, especially with the filler form. It seems to be that we've had people come to us and say, well, my form isn't showing all my data in my print view. So there's been some challenges there. This hyperlink that we're going to add to our file would work, or our form would work in a browser form. So that's great. You can click the link and it'll open up your PDF from the browser. And we've got some better pagination support. So paging can be a real problem in InfoPath, especially when you're dealing with a repeating table or a repeating section and things get cut off funny and you don't really have a lot of control there. You've got some grouping options in reporting services that you don't have there. And so I'm going to go ahead and share out and get and go into a demo so that you guys can see what I'm talking about here. And one thing I forgot to open in advance was my report. So I'm going to go ahead and get that solution opening up here before I start sharing. Let me get my screen shared. And I'll just minimize that guy. So I'm opening up, this is for SQL 2008 R2. There is a difference in the capabilities available to you between 2005, 2008, and 2008 R2. And like most products, as their life cycle advances, you get more and better features, more and better bug fixes. So if, for instance, in your enterprise you had 3 or 4 SQL servers, which is not unheard of, and you had one that was 2005 and one that was 2008 and one that was 2008 R2, and you were trying to decide which one to set up to be your report server, I would suggest you take the most recent version just because of the different capabilities available to you. So here is my report that I have created from my form. As you can see, if you haven't used Business Intelligence Studio before, the designer is pretty straightforward. You've got these little report items you can add. Let me see if I can find the view that shows my report data. Right, and here's my data set with all of my different little tables that I'm querying. You can query your SQL. You can query a table directly. You can query a view. You can write a complex SQL query that joins in the query. In this instance, I just created a data set for each of the tables I'm saving to. Here's the form that I'm working with, and you may have seen this guy before. He's just the 2007 expense report sample. And you can, it doesn't matter how your data is getting into SQL. It can be a database-bound form. I'm using DBXL web services in this particular one. I did create a really ugly database-bound form that I'll show you. It's hideous. And the whole thing that's really of concern is making sure you know whether or not your form has submitted its data. And so depending on how your form gets its data into SQL is how you would determine whether or not it submitted its data. You might have different methodologies. So for example, in my form, what it comes down to for me in this DBXL form that I'm using that submits to DBXL is whether or not it has a doc ID in the Qdabra DBXL processing instruction. instructions. Once an XML has been submitted to DBXL, then we add these processing instructions. So I know something's been submitted by its processing instructions. If they're there and if it has a doc ID, it's been submitted. So I can assume it's got data in SQL. In my report, I have a parameter that takes this field of doc ID, and it's using that parameter to return data for these specific fields. So if I go and I preview my report and I enter a document ID, which it will prompt me for here in the designer, and my numbers lock is off. Let's try again. There we go. And we view our report. Wait for it to load. So I've passed in my document ID, and this is the information for that particular document. Oh, and it looks like I left a little bit of something in there. Let me go clean this up. So here's my expression. I had included a little piece of information from the report there. I'm sorry, from the form there, so that I could verify that that worked. Excuse me. So here we are back at my actual expense report, and what I've done is I've added a section down here. I added that form load rule to check for document ID. I'm setting in my form logic, I'm setting the document ID here so that I can kind of leverage it for some other things. I'm setting my report URL, and you can see it's kind of a little formula there. We'll take a look at that here in a second. And then I'm also using that document ID to show or hide this section. So if I open up one of my submitted forms here, and I'll just pop this guy open, and we'll wait for him because InfoPath is sleepy this morning. While that is opening, we'll just pop over to here. So you noticed I had that secondary data source that I was using in a concat formula to generate my report URL. So your basic URL is going to look like, well, let's just type it out here. It's going to look like this. So the path to your report server, a question mark, the path to your report folder, and your report itself. So there's my full path to my report. And from this point on, it's going to be URL parameters. So I'm not going to worry about updating my form. But if I hover over here, you can see what the URL looks like. So my input my URL parameter is RS, which is report server, format equals PDF. So I'm saying, please give me this back as a PDF. And then I've got doc ID, which is my input parameter, as we could see when we were looking at it in preview. You can see I've got a doc ID input parameter, and it's right there. You want to be careful of your casing, right? So I've got my input parameter of doc ID, and then the number 194. And I was opening this guy up here, and you could see that my document ID here is 194. Now, this is just what I chose to use for the key in my database. It's this document ID. That's the key in my database. And so when I created my data set in my report, I predicated that data set based on this passed in ID. I'm going to go ahead and pop this open. And this is going to open it up in a PDF. Now, obviously, there's a few places where this could be extremely handy. Let's say, for example, that your accounting department requires that you have these expense reports given to them in a PDF, and it has to be in a specific format. You could then, generate this PDF from the document on the fly. The user can click this, they can do a file save as, and now they've got that PDF that they need to send to the accounting department, for example. So that is from my DBXL bound form. It works pretty much the same way from my database bound form. Again, what it would come down to is knowing whether something's been submitted. So if you had a database bound form, you have to have primary keys. InfoPath will populate your primary key field after something's been submitted. So if you've got, if it's an auto-incrementing identity. So if you had an identity column, for example, for your primary key, since that's, it's a nice simple ID to have, InfoPath will populate that upon submit. Or if you have something else that you're using for your primary key, you would know it, and you would have to track in the form when the user had submitted. You really need to just know whether or not a record has been submitted to the database or not, because when you pass in your parameter, you want to make sure you're going to get data returned. I hope that's making sense. So if we preview this guy, what I've done here with my database bound form is I'm just querying him on load to pull back these existing items. Now in this instance, what I did was I did manually modify the view to set up this URL link, and we'll take a quick look at that. But you can see I'm just doing the same thing here. I'm passing in a parameter that will open up the report for me in the format I want. You could change that format to Word, you could change that format to Excel, you could change the format to image. So you could do any of these things to open this up in a different format if it was so desired. You could pass in something different. If you had something different that you needed to use to return your data correctly. If we go look at our data set here, we can see, if it ever loads, there we go. You can see my where clause. Okay, I've got where doc ID, right? That's from my select statement. That's from my actual table, is equal to, and here's my parameter. And when we set up our query, our SQL parameter begins with that @ symbol, and then you can see SQL adds it up here to the parameters for us. Go ahead and cancel that. Yep, I want to cancel. Here is the report manager, which is the kind of the web front end for SQL services, SQL reporting services. And you can see this gives your users a way to browse to reports, which is great if that's what you want them to be able to do. And so obviously if you set up SSRS in your enterprise, it's not going to be just useful to you in terms of a kind of a de facto print view, but you can also use it to provide other reports. For example, let's say accounting wants to be able to see, you know, all of their requests at once. You would be able to do a report that reported on that data, again, either whether or not it was in SQL or in another data source. So if we take a look back at, let me just drop this guy out of our way, get this guy out of our way, close this guy, and let's go take a quick look at the view change I made. So the issue here, right, is with our database-bound form, we don't want to go just adding a data field here that we don't need just to kind of be a placeholder for our URL. So for the hyperlink, I went ahead and you can't actually type a formula here. I went ahead and just modified the view manually to handle for that. So I'm going to close that and we'll take a quick look at that. I keep clicking this and I'm not getting it open for you. Just one second. There we go. Okay. So if I go ahead and extract this guy so we can take a look at the view. And here's my view. And I know about where he is. Or maybe I don't. That's okay. We can find him. Okay, so here's our formula right here. And so for the href attribute, what I did was I just added a formula here for this. So when I first created the hyperlink, I just connected it to the report server URL portion of my form logic, and then I added in the rest of the concat formula. You can see I had to, you have to encode your quote marks and so on, or you can use a single quote. And then I've got my report path, and those are just from my form logic file, and that's just a personal preference to kind of set some of these things up in something like a secondary XML so that they're easier for me to change if I wanted to go and put this out someplace else. I could modify these things easily in my form logic, and you can see I included my display link there as well. So if we go back over here, I've just got this simple little concat formula that's including the format equals PDF, and then here is my parameter that I'm passing in. and I'm passing in the doc ID attribute there that is from the the main data source itself. So that was just in order to not have to add another field to my data table that I did not need. I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to show you, which was just this basic concept that you can create a report that will have more options available to you than an InfoPath print view might have. And then from your form, you can pass in some piece of information, whatever parameter you need to pass in, to get back your unique data and present it then for your user in a different format. And then you can export it as whatever. It can be, it can be Word, it can be Excel, all of these things. Oh, one thing I was going to mention that I had almost forgotten. Do when you're trying your report, make sure you check it out in these different formats. Make sure you take a look at it. I have found, except in the simplest of reports, I have found that frequently the format that will export nicely to PDF or Word, for example, may not export nicely to Excel. So you do want to kind of keep an eye on how things are looking. For example, right now when I export this to Word, I don't really appear to have any kind of a top margin above my header, so I might want to move my header down a little bit. You can see exports to Word generate these nested tables that may or may not be acceptable to you, but that is how it works. And when you export to Excel, if you don't have things aligned just so, sometimes you'll end up with hidden rows and hidden columns, and that can be a little challenging for people to deal with if they're trying to parse the data, do some filtering or things like that. So in general, I think it's a good idea to know what your export's going to be, your export format's going to be, and test your report frequently in that format. And then I hesitate to suggest 2 copies of the same report, but if you do have a requirement that they be able to export to Word or PDF, sometimes it's actually simpler to just go ahead and have 2 copies of the report, one intended to export to Word and one intended to export to PDF, if you have serious issues getting things to align nicely. And again, a lot of this does have to do with how complex the item is. This one's not too bad, but in a more complex report, you may see some things that are unsightly when exported to Word that you can live with when exported to PDF. So I encourage you to try a multiplicity of options there, and just make sure you're verifying what you're trying. And I'll go ahead and pop back over to the slideshow, and I guess that's about it. I encourage you to learn more about SSRS. I encourage you, if you have reporting services installed for your organization, see about getting the business intelligence tools installed on your machine so that you can try designing some reports, check out the different types of data sources available, and see if this can work for you for an option of a print view for InfoPath. We've definitely got time for questions. If there's something I skated over too lightly that you'd like some more information on, please let me know. And let me know if I've been confusing or if there's something you'd like some more information on, because I'm happy to answer some questions.
And Hilary, while you're waiting for questions, can I just remind everybody about our upcoming training programs? Let's see, we've got an in-person class and an online class, both coming up in September. It's an InfoPath Master Training. Let's see if I can share my screen for more information. Let's see if that'll work. Hopefully you can see that. Anyway, the online class is September 24th through 28th, and the in-person class is September 18th through 20th. We do have a special for those attending the webinar. And just email course manager at Qdabra.com for the discount code. You can save either $50 or $100 off a class. Sorry about that, my phone's ringing.
So we've had a couple of questions. One was how to get to SSRS. Well, SQL Server Reporting Services is something that's installed on a SQL server. It's not, I should say my last installations that I did were with SQL 2005, and at that time it wasn't installed by default. So if you do not have it configured for your SQL server, you would need to walk through the SQL install again and select it as an option. You can find quite a bit online for installing reporting services for SQL. Once it's installed, you need to do some configuration steps. There's a configuration wizard on the server that can help you with that. The next question was on automate batching reports. You know, the thing about report services is it has a bunch of features like subscriptions. You can set things up to push out email reports. You know, you can send things to people via email and so forth. I have a feeling what Patrick was asking about was if you wanted to, for example, roll through everything in your database and create a report for it. And that isn't terribly complex code, but it would probably involve code. However, there is such a thing as data-driven subscriptions. I believe, though, that the data-driven portion of that is only the recipients, but it might be worth looking into. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I will go ahead and wrap this up. You know, feel free to contact us if there's something you need some more information on. I'll be wrapping everything up in a zip file, so we will have these files if you're interested in getting them, and we will have those available for you as well as a video. Other than that, if there's nothing else, oh, I see Jeff has a question. Jeff has asked, can you review how you requested the document ID inside of InfoPath, the DBXL document ID inside of InfoPath? Absolutely. 1 second, Jeff. I'm going to go ahead and share my monitor back out again. So with DBXL, as I mentioned, let me drop this down so you guys aren't just watching me in this weird recursive screen within a screen. Okay, so in DBXL, when we submit a document to DBXL, it gets processing instructions added to it. So I'm going to go ahead and download this file so we can take a look at it. Okay, so I'm just going to save this. I'll wrap my cheat sheet up with the rest of these files with these formulas so you can take so you've got an option to see that as well. So if we just, let's do an open with, see if it's going to be kind to me here and provide me with the options I would like. No. Okay, cancel, close. We'll do this the old-fashioned way. I wanted to show you the processing instructions, so let's just take a look at that real quick. Okay, I've got to pretty this up because I can't, I have issues with XML that is not properly formatted. Okay, so here we go. So if we take a look at this, we can see, I've got some interesting processing instructions here. So we can see here's my Qdabra DBXL processing instructions right here. DBXL adds those when our document is submitted. So what I'm doing in my formula is I'm basically going and looking to see if the DBXL processing instruction is there. And then if it is, I'm getting back the document ID. So if we take a look back here at my form again, I'm starting out in a form load rule. Now, if you wanted to be able to submit, open up a brand new form, fill it out, submit it to DBXL, and not close it, but immediately have the doc ID to offer it to the user in terms of being able to like submit then print right away, probably the most straightforward way to go with that would be to use Q rules. There's a submit to DBXL command that will return this document ID as soon as the document's submitted. Okay, so in this instance, I'm working in this kind of false conceit that you would submit, close, and they'd go back and they'd open it again at a later time, and then they'd make printed. In reality, I think it's a lot more likely that you'd want to submit it, leave the form open, and print it immediately, or open it up to this PDF view or Word view or whatever right away, in which case you would probably want to use the Q rules submit to DBXL method, since that is, I think, the easiest way to submit to DBXL and get your document ID back right away without closing and reopening. However, that said, in this form, I added a form load rule, and it's setting the doc ID. I don't have a condition on it because if it doesn't find this doc ID, it's just going to set the field to blank. So there's no harm in having this without a condition. Here's what the formula looks like. It's a substring before that's wrapped around a substring after. So the substring after is looking for processing instructions with a local name of Qdabra DBXL. Let's go back to the wrong thing. Let's go back to Notepad. So it's looking for this, processing instruction with the local name of Qdabra DBXL. Okay? And so it's looking for everything after doc ID, right? So you can see it's looking for everything after that doc ID with a single quote. So we're looking with a quote mark. We're looking for everything after this. So our substring after is returning all of whatever, So it's returning everything to there probably. Now what we want out of that is we want just this number. Okay, so we pop back over here and we can see that we've got a substring before, and it's returning everything before a single quote. Okay, and so if we go back again and take a look at our processing instruction, it's returning everything before the quotes. So that's kind of narrowing it down and pulling back just the doc ID. So I set a field in my form to that value. You could just use the formula dynamically, but I set a field because I wanted to use it for some conditional formatting and some things like that, and I'm just kind of lazy and don't want to have to use the formula again and again and again. Does that make sense? Yes, and Patrick mentioned in chat that you can also use QueryDB to get the document ID, and that's very true. You could do a submit, and then you could query that table back on some other piece of information in your form that's unique to return that document ID. Absolutely. So it wouldn't be restricted to just Q rules. But if you need some ideas for getting that document ID back immediately after submit, definitely drop us a line, drop me a line, and I'm happy to talk about that with you. If there are no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and I see somebody else is typing. Okay, thanks, Brian. If there's no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. As always, please contact us if you need more information. I'm typing my email into chat. Drop me an email if there was something I was unclear on and you need more information. If you contact us through the contact form, we'll make sure to get you these samples. We'll have this posted to the web later today. And as always, have a wonderful day. Enjoy InfoPath. If you're a data wonk, you're going to love SQL reporting services. It's going to really free you up. There's a lot of automation you can do there that would allow you to free up other resources in your organization. So definitely worth looking into, worth investigating. And by the way, if you can design forms, you can design reports. There's no complexity there that you're not going to be able to master. If you can understand InfoPath, trust me, you'll do just fine with SQL reporting services. So don't let it intimidate you or frighten you. It is really powerful stuff, and you can do great things with it. So have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.